Did you know that Babe Ruth played first base before he played the outfield? It's true, and I was surprised when I discovered it myself. So let's go back to 1918. Now, the year 1918 meant something different up to about 20 years ago. It was more of a taunt than a year. When we go back to 1918, we're going back to America's involvement in World War I. We're also going back to the great Boston Red Sox teams of yore, teams that were led by the incomparable Babe Ruth. Now, the crazy thing, the thing that's really hard for us to imagine these days, is that Babe Ruth back then was respected more for his pitching than his hitting. Now, people knew that Ruth was a great hitter, but the truth is that the Red Sox had never figured out how to really take advantage of that. You can find articles going back to at least 1916 predicting that Ruth would eventually become an everyday player. So keep that in mind. Ruth's hitting ability was not exactly a state secret. Babe Ruth was one of 3 players to hit 3 home runs for the Red Sox in 1916. He only hit 2 in 1917, but his batting average was .325, and he had an amazing .857 OPS, excellent for a pitcher. Sure, he was a long way away from hitting 60 home runs, but it was clear that he enjoyed hitting and that he was a major asset for the Red Sox when he came up to the plate. Boston just needed to have an excuse to get him to play more often. And that excuse finally came in May 1918. Boston's regular first baseman at that time was Dick Hoblitzell. The newspapers affectionately called him Hobby. Hobby was actually captain of the club that season. He was 29 years old and had been a fairly good hitter up to that time. However, Captain Hobby wound up with a sore finger on May 6th, which kept him out of the lineup. And that gave Babe Ruth a chance. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind here is that back in 1918, the rosters were extremely limited. I mean, it's not like today. You couldn't just pull a guy out from AAA and have him show up the next day. And there was also a major war going on and a draft. I mean, baseball players were not exactly in high supply in 1918. The Red Sox had to do what they could with what they had. And so Ruth got the start. Now, as fate would have it, the Red Sox were in the Polo Grounds that day, and they were playing none other than the New York Yankees. Babe Ruth was hitting .438 at the time, and he had homered in the previous game against the Yankees on May 4th. The Red Sox had Ruth hit 6th in this game. He had been hitting in the traditional number 9 spot reserved for pitchers up to this point. That's a really good indication that his managers didn't know what to do with him. Anyway, Ruth singled in the top of the 2nd, and then in the top of the 4th with a man on, he blasted a home run. The Babe went 2 for 4 that day, but the Red Sox lost 10-3. But that was the start of something new and different. Up until that point, Ruth had only pitched. He had never played the field in an official Major League game. After this game, however, Babe Ruth more or less became an everyday player. He finally settled in the outfield when he wasn't pitching. Now, Babe Ruth did miss some time in May that year with a bout of tonsillitis. In fact, news of his sickness made the front page of the Boston Globe right next to the war news. Now, I don't think I can overstate just what a huge star Babe Ruth was, even back in the Boston days. We tend to overlook his days with the Red Sox, and that's a mistake that we shouldn't make. But the real question is, whatever happened to Captain Hobby? Well, Captain Hobby found himself back in the lineup on May 9th in Washington, D.C. Babe Ruth pitched that day and batted 4th, by the way. And, of course, the Babe stole the show. I haven't done a lot of research on this, but I'm convinced that this is one of the very, very few times in Major League Baseball history that the starting pitcher, as part of the starting lineup, was hitting 4th. And Ruth, of course, went 5 for 5 that day with a double and a triple. But Washington won in 10 innings, 4-3. See, no matter how I tell this story, Babe Ruth always manages to grab the spotlight. I mean, even over 100 years after the fact, his presence just overwhelms everything else. Meanwhile, poor Captain Hobby found his baseball playing days numbered. Hoblitzell was nominated to be a lieutenant in the Army Dental Corps, which took him away from the game of baseball. Captain Hobby never played in Major League Baseball after 1918. And if he's remembered at all, it's mostly as an answer to a trivia question. He's the man who lost his spot in the lineup to Babe Ruth. But, of course, there's still more to this story. To my knowledge, Captain Hobby never left the United States in 1918. but he did contract influenza not long after departing the Red Sox. In fact, he came close to passing away. I haven't found much information on exactly how he beat the famous flu, but he managed to do it in the end. Captain Hobby played in the minor leagues for a few seasons after the war and had a few managerial stints as well. Amazingly, despite the ravaging flu, Dick Hoblitzell lived to the age of 74. When he passed away, a brief obituary ran in newspapers around the country, but it left out the fact that the Babe had replaced Captain Hobby the first time he had started a game in the field. So you see, we have a bad habit. We, and I even mean those of us who are well versed in history, we tend to believe that history had to happen the way that it happened. As such, we tend to think that Babe Ruth would have inevitably become an outfield player because he had such hitting talent. But the truth is that it really didn't have to happen. I mean, if Captain Hobby's finger had never been hurt, it's possible that the Babe might have continued pitching for his entire career.